Well, once again, it's time to go Inside EMS. I am your host, Chris Cebollero, and I am coming to you live from the Inside EMS studios. Actually, I'm just really coming to you from my office in St. Louis, Missouri. We don't have any Inside EMS studios. Kelly Grayson is on special assignment, and I am going to be flying solo today, giving you the best that I've got and try to keep you entertained, trying to keep you persuaded, trying to keep you inspired as only I know how to do. Oh, my goodness, pardon me. But I was telling the story the other day about being an FTO and the pride I took in that role. And one of the things that I think is very, very important for agencies is to understand the important role of field training officer. And anytime that I have the opportunity to talk about clinical skill or to talk about clinical training with organizations, it always revolves around the FTOs, and it always revolves around how important that they are. So I want to thank you for joining today, because I think today we have a really great show, and something that we're going to break down is how do we take care of the next generation with field training officers who actually lead. So I'm not talking about how they precept people. I'm talking about not running through a checklist or not running through the skills that we have to give them or not running through the protocols that we have, but actually, how do they lead and how important are they in leading as leaders inside our organization? This isn't about stepping up. This is about becoming a leader who shapes culture, who inspires confidence, and who sets standards for what's exceptional inside an EMS organization. I used to say all the time that my FTOs were the gatekeepers to the organization, and it was important for them to set the standard of what that was going to look like. This isn't about just someone coming into your organization and learning a culture from FTOs. It's about them setting a culture. So whether you're an FTO now, you're aspiring to be an FTO, or you're a leader looking to develop your FTO program, this is the episode for you, because I'm going to take this down for you step by step. But I do want to start off by saying that FTOs are the gatekeepers of the organization. They're the ones who are setting the standards for somebody to follow. What skills do they have? What attributes do they need to have? And how do we structure a real FTO program that builds strong field leaders, right? So when we think about this from a true connection, the employee is coming to your organization. This is really where the psychology of organizational socialization comes in. There are four elements to organizational socialization, and I'm not gonna bore you with what they are, but it starts off with the employee that wants to come and work to your organization. When I had the opportunity to work in MedStar in Fort Worth, Texas, there are people who tried to get into that organization multiple times who still can't work in that organization. And it's because how tough it was to get in. It was because of the process they had to go through. It was because of the tests they had to take. It was because of what the field training element looked like. There were a lot of people who came to work that couldn't make it out of the field training process and get into the organization. So when we talk about organizational socialization, it's the first step in filling out that application that really gives that sense of joining. Then the next step is when they actually come into the organization. When you think about these elements, that's a big component. Once they get into the organization that they've been dreaming about and joining that culture to become part of that organization, this is where some of those FTOs who are a little bit crispy around the edges will now start to say, well, don't do anything that I tell you, and this is the way that we really do it. And the leaders don't know exactly and how is that setting up a new employee for the best opportunities that they have inside that organization? If an FTO is going to take shortcuts, and if they're going to mock policy, and if they're going to mock leaders, and if they're going to talk about the poor, paramedics they have in the system, then guess what? That culture, no matter what it is going to become the new mission statement. On the other hand, when you have an FTO that upholds high standards, that models professionalism, that teaches with purpose, your organization now multiplies that mindset. And you have to be able to ensure that those FTOs just aren't passing along protocols and tips, but they're shaping attitude, they're shaping expectation, they're shaping behaviors, and they are the first ambassadors of your agency's values. And you have to be able to ensure that what they're doing and what they're giving is the absolute best. Again, because they're setting the standards for others to follow. One of the things that I used to do as a clinical director was I used to look at the challenges that I would have with employees. Who's not bringing their equipment into a call? Who's not following their protocols the right way? Who's not whatever it is? But one of the things that I would look at was who is their FTO? Who trained them to do what they're doing, right? Because now I wanted to see if there was going to be a pattern. Employee A is having a challenge with bringing their equipment in. Employee B is having a challenge with bringing their equipment in. Oh my gosh, who's their FTO? It's the same person. So this is not about a skills gatekeeper. This is about a culture builder. This is not a senior medic with time on their hands. This is a professional mentor who represents the agency, who represents the values of the agency. And here's what a great FTO needs to do. They need to model professionalism on and off scene. They need to debrief with purpose, not just point out mistakes. Now, sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes we have to say, well, one of the things that we used to do in the FTO program was, how many liters of oxygen do you want to give them before they even put oxygen on the patient to say, hey, let's get to the oxygen? Or what'd you get for a set of vital signs, right? So there were things that we would do there, but it's not just necessarily pointing out those mistakes, but it's giving them the skills, it's giving them the confidence, it's giving them the comfort to be there on what could be the worst day of somebody's life. When a mother hands you a 3-month-old that's in cardiac arrest, that's not the time to figure out that you're not comfortable with that arrest. We've got to be able to build that and understand that in the FTO process. A field training officer really needs to teach emotional resilience as much as clinical techniques. We talk about it all the time. And Kelly and I on the show talk about resiliency and all these people who can't make it through EMS because of the burnout and because of all the stress and because of all the things that they're seeing. We need to teach our new employees emotional resilience. We also need to build trust, not fear. One of the things that I want from my FTOs is for them to be the mentors of people, not just when they walk into the organization, but when they're out on their own truck, that they have someone to call and say, man, I just had this call and I just don't know. And maybe I didn't do it right. And maybe I forgot. And what if and someone that you can bounce those ideas off of. Kelly and I talked a couple of weeks ago about how we don't like to share our medicine with people or how we don't like to take criticism from people. What if there was that one trusted advisor, one trusted mentor, one trusted person that you can go to? That needs to be your field training officer. Another thing that FTOs do is they need to know how every interaction shapes confidence and how we identify those new providers and where their challenges are so we can get them to a better place, so we can get them to a place of comfort. EMS is a very egotistical business. I don't know if you know that, but it's the egotism that keeps us from asking the question why, because we don't want to look like we don't know what we're talking about in front of our peers. Well, if you know everything there is to know about EMS, raise your hand. We've got to have a sounding board. We've got to have somebody that we can talk to. We've got to have somebody that we can trust. And this is where the FTO comes in. Now, I want to take you through a mindset shift because FTOs are not just the senior citizens or the senior clinicians inside an organization. They are field leaders too. And they are the first field leaders that those employees are going to touch. And we have to now be able to think about our FTOs as field leaders. But much too often, we give massive responsibility to these people who have little support or have little development. Too many agencies promote field training officers based on seniority or based on availability or give it to them as a reward, not based on leadership ability. That's like giving a map to someone without a compass. There's nothing on the map. It's just a topological map. There's no compass. How are you going to get from point A to point B? Well, it's the same thing with our field training officers. We got to take them from point A to point B. We've got to give them everything they need to be successful. So if you expect them to guide new employees, to represent the agency, to provide feedback, and to influence culture, then we need to treat them like they're part of the leadership team. And how do we do that? We need to let them come to meetings. We need to let them hear what the leaders are up to. We need to listen to their insight. We need to help them grow on a continual basis. It's not that they're the trainers now that we forget about them. Who's their coaches and who's their mentors? And how are we going to get them to the next level of their success? We need to hold them to a high standard and we need to support them for reaching it. Or unfortunately, we need to end our professional relationship with those FTOs if they can't reach those high standards. Because again, they are setting the standard for others to follow. They are setting the organizational socialization. They are setting what the future of the culture is going to look like for the organization. You can't build a strong workforce, ladies and gentlemen, if your trainers aren't trained themselves. And what is that process going to look like? So we have to be able to look at their skills, we have to be able to look at their attributes, and we have to be able to take them to the next level of where they need to be. So let's talk about that. What is it that makes a great FTO? I'm glad you asked me that. Who was asking me that? I heard somebody ask me that. I'm glad you asked me that because I'm going to tell you, yes, it's true. They have to be clinically sound, but that's not enough. A strong FTO has to be able to be technically competent in leadership skills. They've got to be able to coach. They've got to be able to communicate. They've got to be able to connect. I used to say to the FTOs all the time, your job is to develop a rapport over vast personality. What does that mean? You just can't teach somebody one way. You've got to be able to understand how people teach, or I'm sorry, how people learn, and then you've got to be able to teach them to the way that they learn and not necessarily how best that you learn. Another skill that has to be given or that a FTO has to have is good emotional intelligence. Can you read the room? Can you de-escalate tensions? Can you provide feedback without people becoming defensive? More importantly, if they see you get fired up, if they see you get angry, if they say you get frustrated and they think that that's okay, then they're going to think that they're able to do that too. So we've got to be able to have a good, solid foundation of emotional intelligence and be able to teach other people to develop a high degree of emotional intelligence. There's 5 components of emotional intelligence. I'm not going to go through them with you today. Go ahead and check them out, but there's something that everyone needs to know. Number 2 is there needs to be a good opportunity to deliver clear communication with expectation. So you got to give direction, and you got to give direction that's calm. We talked about that in emotional intelligence. We got to give communication that's honest. We got to give communication that's helpful, and even deliver communication in stressful situations, in that cardiac arrest, in that pediatric arrest, in that ejection trauma that just happened on the highway of someone that just got ejected through the windshield or thrown out of their, thrown out of their side window because they weren't wearing their seatbelt. Sometimes we got to give direction in those situations. I actually had to grab somebody one time and say, you were embarrassing yourself. Stop it and follow me. And you've got to be able to do that in a way that's not threatening. Number 3 is professionalism. It's how you wear your uniform. It's how you carry yourself. It's how you present yourself. It's showing up with integrity. It's modeling what's expected. And it's holding the line with respect. Not only respect for you, but respect for your agency, but more importantly, respect for the EMS career field. And we have to be able to bring that forward. We've got to be able to tout that at every single turn that we can, because that's what's going to be important. Coaching mentality is another thing that's important. Again, when we start to think about somebody's mental well-being, when we start to think about their self-confidence, when we start to think about their self-esteem, this isn't about ego. It's about elevating people to riding next to them 18 inches away that you're going to want to work with, that you're going to want them to treat your family if it's your family that they're responding to. One of the worst calls that I ever had to take as a clinical director was from an FTO who treated a family member, and the family member called me to say they gave poor care. And what was special about this call was that it was coming from another FTO. And they heard about the call from their family member, and they knew that that's not the way that we do business. They knew that that wasn't our culture. They knew that that's not what the expectation was. And when they came into my office to complain, I didn't investigate that call 1 minute. I went right to that FTO and say, tell me what happened on this call. because I believe the integrity of that FTO that was sitting in my office. So when we think about coaching mentality, we've got to be able to make sure that they understand what's at stake here. Number 5 is situational awareness. How important is situational awareness in our job? How important is teaching situational awareness in our job? What's the first 2 things we talk about, ladies and gentlemen? Universal precaution, scene safety. Paramedics and EMTs are the best at making sure the scene is safe. Where they fail is making sure the scene continually stays safe. We know that the scene is safe when we get out of the highway, but now we have cars that are whipping around us at 70 miles an hour. Is that a safe scene? Or we know that the scene is safe when we arrive at an assault in an apartment complex, and now all of a sudden there are 50 people who are gathering around us. Is that scene safe? We have to be able to teach good situational awareness. And our field training officers have to be able to have the power, have to be able to have the skill, have to be able to have the knowledge and ability to teach good situational awareness. And then finally, number 6 is consistency. We have to be able to ensure that trainees share their experiences with everyone else, because they're going to do that. Because that's the one thing you ask: who is your FTO? Right? How many times have you asked that question? We need to be able to ensure that we are setting the standards that we want to have from our trainees. That when somebody says, my FTO is Chris Cebollero, people are going to know that they were trained the same, that it was consistent, they got the same level of compassion, they got the same level of inspiration, the same level of motivation. Our standards shouldn't, vary based on who we're teaching. They should be exactly the same. And there's one more thing: honesty. As an FTO, we have to be willing to tell the truth. And we have to be able to be honest with people that I don't know that you're going to make it unless. I don't know that you're going to get through this training process unless, right? So an FTO must be willing to tell the truth. Sometimes that means giving fair but firm evaluations. That might be sometimes failing someone on that call. It's not sugarcoating. There's no unchecked bias here. It's just accurate feedback that will allow people to grow, right? And that's what this is all about, is we are setting people into our organization, the organization that we respect, the organization that we love, maybe you don't love it, but if you're in a role of an FTO, you need to have some love for that organization. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a little bit lost. One of the things that I loved doing when I was in charge of the FTO program was developing an FTO program that people could be excited to be part of. Okay. I want to give you just a few, I don't know, a few attributes of what a good FTO program looks like, because this is not just about developing an FTO program to train people, but it's also a program that you can continually train, that you can give them topics of continuing education, whether it's in, public speaking or the adult learner or how to motivate or how to inspire. So how do you actually build an FTO program that's going to create leaders and not trainers? Here's my framework, and I'm going to share it with you. First, it's the selection process. This is not just about time and service. This is not just about the FTO or the paramedics that have the most time. You need to vet those FTOs. You need to interview them. You need to look into their mindset and not just their resume. You need to find out. One of the questions that I used to ask my FTOs all the time is, why did you get into EMS? Why'd you get into EMS? And I want to hear the story. And I want to know why that story works for you. Other things that we need to work for them, because you know what? That's the foundation of who they are. And when you put together that academy, next is that initial training that we need to be able to think about. I want to know, I need to teach them about adult learners. I need to teach them how to give constructive and corrective feedback, how to be motivating and how to be inspirational, and how to give people what they need. We need to talk about conflict resolution and give them conflict resolution skills. One of the things that I don't believe in anymore is the progressive discipline system. I don't believe in the verbal and the written and the final written and take your day off and think about what you just did and come back and tell me that you want to work here. I believe in coaching. And I believe in finding people's strengths and polishing them. I believe in finding people's weaknesses and polishing them and making them strengths. We need to be able to ensure that the FTOs are taking that mentality and they're bringing it forward to the people who are in their truck. And more importantly, I need to be able to teach them how to uphold values under pressure. I think that's another thing. This is more philosophy, right? When we start to think about adult learners and inspiration and motivation and how this is all supposed to work. The other thing that we need to do is set clear expectation. We need to set a training rubric that's going to allow us to say that this is the framework that's going to allow you to have success. We need to set expectations for professionalism. We need to set expectations for interaction, communication, and we need to make sure that our FTOs know what good looks like. And we need to be able to outline those expectations. One of the things that we do as leaders, ladies and gentlemen, is we give people assignments, but do we ever tell them what the expectation is or what excellent is going to look like when they're done with that training, when they're done with that task? Do we do that? We don't do it well enough. We also need to talk about instructor methodology. I gave all my FTOs instructor methodology. They had to know the methods of teaching. It was a 40-hour course that I taught that gave them both the art and science of how to be a classroom instructor. Why is that important? Because there's no difference of getting out from a classroom than sitting in that ambulance and going into those hospitals with those new students. You give your class. I remember when I started to go off into the leadership development space, the very first lecture I taught, it was something like basic leadership skills or whatever it was. I had 3 people show up to that class. It was my first time. I was advertising the class. 3 people came to that class. But you know what? I gave that class like there were 1,000 people in that room with the same enthusiasm, with the same motivation. And what we need to be able to do is ensure that we take our classroom presence and we bring it out into the truck. And we need to be able to make that happen. From a third component of a leadership, we need to be able to, or a fourth component. So the first component was selection. Second component was initial training. Third component is expectation. Fourth component is ongoing training. You should have monthly FTO meetings with those leaders. And you should talk about some of the challenges that they're having in the truck, some of the challenges that they're having with their specific folks. And the things that I think that we need to look at now is to figure out how we are going to make that work for them when they're in that truck, right? So, but at the end of that, you need to be able to also ensure that you're teaching them something new. Create a space where shared learning happens. Maybe this isn't you as the clinical director teaching it. Maybe it's another FTO that's bringing something to them when it comes to communication or whatever it is. Give your FTOs the opportunity to train their peers as well. One of the things that I used to ask my FTOs to do was write articles. And those articles used to not only go out to the workforce, but they went out to their peers as well, right? And I used to be able to, I gave my FTOs subject matter expert areas. So one person was in charge of cardiology, there was a backup. One person was in charge of trauma, there was a backup. And then every so often, I would shift them in their subject matter expertise. So now the person who was doing cardiology is now the SME for respiratory or whatever that is. So give them the opportunity to make sure that they are learning, they're learning from each other, and they stay as sharp as they can be. And then finally, in your training, we need to be able to build feedback loops. Give a new employee a safe way to provide feedback about their FTOs and about their FTO experience. This helps surface patterns. This helps to highlight excellence. I got to tell you, one of the things that I did as a best practice was just because you were an FTO doesn't mean that you had the opportunity to stay an FTO. Every 2 years, you had to reapply to your position. And it was a peer group that gave you the opportunity to continue for another 2 years. So we need to be able to make sure that they're training hard, that they have good success in training, that when the trainees get into the fleet, that they're doing a great job, and we need to fix any problems early. That's a lot of stuff, man. Let's see. We're going. I mean, we're running along. I think I'm talking a little bit too fast. I feel a little lightheaded. I mean, a little drink of water just to catch up on my thoughts. But if we look at what we're doing when it comes to field trainers, we are really setting a standard. And sometimes leaders think that there's this culture inside an organization. And at the field level, there's really this culture in an organization that the people who are sitting in the leather chairs don't know about. but it's the field training offers that are setting those expectations, right? All right, so let's get to the bottom line here. What's the bottom line, Chris? You've been babbling for all this time. Let's go ahead and get to the end, and let's go ahead and figure out, what the fortune in this fortune cookie is. If you want, and it comes down to this, just this bottom line. If you want to protect the culture of the organization, if you want better retention, if you want to have good recruiting, it starts with the FTO program. You need to train them, you need to support them, you need to respect them, and you need to give them the authority that they deserve. Don't assign the title and hope for the best, right? Develop the role into a leadership position that inspires people daily. They just don't fall into the status quo, right? If you're already a great FTO, if you already have great FTOs, recognize them. If you're a great FTO, share your skill with the other FTOs. Invest in your team, invest in your trainers, and make sure that they lead with purpose. Because when you get your FTO program right, your whole organization will rise. And I think that's about it. I think I've covered everything a little bit, maybe a little bit fast, right? But I do want to be able to say, when it comes to your field training officers, a lot of times they're not given the respect that they deserve. They're not considered feelers. What do we want from our leaders, right? We want them to be professional. We want them to look good in their uniform. We want them to have good communication skills. We want them to have good conflict resolution skills. What do we want from our field trainers? More importantly, what do we want from our workforce? We want them to be professional. We want them to look good in their uniform. We want them to have good communication. We want them to have good conflict resolution. Our FTOs and our field providers are leaders inside our organization as well. And we need to remember and change that mentality of what it's like to have field trainers. Okay, enough of that said. If this is something that resonated with you, I want to hear about it. Send us an email at the show at ems1.com. Share this episode with your leadership team or forward it to an FTO who's out there making a difference, or prepare yourself. I gave you 6 attributes, 6 skills that you need to have to be a good FTO. Start working on them now if you are an FTO, or start training in them now if you eventually want to become an FTO. And if you've got an idea or a program that you're proud of, reach out and tell us about it. Tell us what makes your FTO program the best. I'm Chris Cebollero, and for Kelly Grayson, I want to thank you for joining us on Inside EMS. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and email us at the show at ems1.com. And as Kelly Grayson says, we'll catch you all again next week.